The morning of my 71st birthday, I woke up early and made myself a pot of coffee. Not because I wanted coffee. I just needed something to do with my hands. I'd been awake since 4, lying in the dark, listening to the house. It makes so many sounds when you're alone in it. The refrigerator hums. The floorboards in the hallway settle and pop. Out back, the neighbors' wind chimes knock against each other in a slow, lazy rhythm. I used to sleep right through all of it. Now I notice every single sound, the way you notice silence in a room where music used to play. I went to the kitchen in my robe and stood at the counter while the coffee brewed, and I looked at the calendar on the wall. My daughter had given it to me the previous Christmas. One of those scenic calendars with covered bridges in New England. October showed a red bridge somewhere in Vermont. Pretty enough. She'd written nothing on my birthday square. Not even a small star, the way I used to mark things on her calendar when she was young. Report card day. Dentist appointment. Her first dance recital. I'd stopped expecting a card in the mail the year before, but you'd think a small star wouldn't be too much to ask. My husband Leonard, my late husband, I still have to remind myself to say that, even now, he used to make such a production out of my birthday. He wasn't a grand gesture kind of man in general. He didn't bring home flowers randomly or leave little notes in my coat pocket like the husbands in movies. But birthdays, he took seriously. He'd get up before me and make blueberry pancakes, which I don't even like that much, but I always ate them like they were the finest thing I'd ever tasted, because he was so pleased with himself for making them. He'd set the table with the good dishes. He'd find some small thing I'd mentioned wanting months ago. Something I'd completely forgotten, I said, and he'd have it wrapped in the brown paper he saved from grocery deliveries. He died 14 months before that birthday morning. Pancreatic cancer. 11 weeks from diagnosis to the end. 11 weeks is nothing. 11 weeks is not enough time to say everything you need to say. And I know, because I spent those weeks trying and I still didn't finish. But that's not really what this is about. This is about what happened after. My son lives 40 minutes away. I've driven that road so many times I could probably do it half asleep. Past the old grain elevator they turned into apartments. Left at the church with the broken steeple they've been raising money to fix for 6 years, then down the long, straight county road through the fields. 40 minutes. I used to make that drive every other week just to drop off a casserole or take my granddaughter to a movie. I knew every bump in that road. He stopped coming around right around month 3 after Leonard died. I don't mean he stopped entirely, I mean his visits started stretching. What had been every week became every other week, then once a month. Then I'd realize suddenly, standing in the grocery store or waking up in the night, that I hadn't seen him in 6 weeks. 7. And I'd try to think of why, and I couldn't come up with a single reason. He was busy. I knew he was busy. They'd just done a kitchen renovation, and his wife worked long hours, and their youngest had started travel soccer, which seemed to involve driving to towns I'd never heard of on weekends. I understood all of that. I'd raised children. I knew how life presses in on you. I wasn't asking to be the center of his calendar. I just wanted to exist somewhere on it. My daughter was further away, physically, about 3 hours by car, closer to the state line. She called more regular than my son, I'll give her that. But there's a kind of phone call that is more about checking something off a list than it is about actually talking, and I started to feel the difference. How she'd ask, "How are you doing?" but not wait for the real answer. How the calls got shorter. How she developed a habit of ending them. "Okay, Mom, I've got to get the kids settled," or "I've got an early meeting tomorrow." Just at the moment when I might have said something real. I understood. Or I tried to. Leonard had understood too, in his way. He used to say our children had their own lives now. And wasn't that the point? Hadn't we raised them to be capable, independent people who built lives of their own? I'd agree with him out loud. And I meant it. I did. But there's a difference between knowing something is right and not feeling the ache of it anyway. He sat in his armchair by the living room window during those last weeks, when he was too tired to do much of anything. He'd watch the driveway. When a car would pass on the road, he'd track it until it was out of sight. He never said he was waiting. I never asked him directly because I didn't want to make him feel worse. But I knew what he was watching for. Our son came twice in those 11 weeks. Our daughter came once, at the very end, when I called her and said she needed to come now, if she was going to come at all. I want to be fair. I've spent a lot of time trying to be fair about this, turning it over, looking at it from their side. They had jobs. They had children of their own. Illness is hard to be around, especially when it's moving fast and there's nothing you can do to stop it. Some people manage it by staying close, and some people manage it by keeping a certain distance, and I've known both kinds, and I try not to judge. But I'd be lying if I said there wasn't a part of me that counted, that kept a quiet tally somewhere in the back of my mind, the way you do when you're trying not to. 2 visits. 1 visit. 2 phone calls a week that became 1. Leonard asking me, once, very quietly, had I heard from them, and me saying yes, they'd called just yesterday, when really it had been 4 days. I lied to make him feel better. I've thought about that a lot since. After he passed, I expected things to shift. That sounds terrible, I know. I wasn't glad he was gone. I was not for a single second, not in any part of me. But I thought that maybe once the grief settled in properly, once there was no more sickness to manage or distance to keep from, my children would come back around. People do that. Tragedy cracks people open. You see it at funerals. Relatives who haven't spoken in years, standing together in the parking lot afterward, exchanging phone numbers, meaning every word of it in that moment. For a while, it seemed like that might happen. They both came to the funeral, of course. My son gave a eulogy that made the whole room cry, and I looked at him up there at that podium and thought, there he is, that's my boy, he's still in there somewhere. My daughter held my hand through the service and didn't let go, not once. That night, the 3 of us sat in the kitchen for 2 hours after everyone else had left. We looked at photos. We laughed about some things. We cried about others. I thought we'd turned a corner. But corners are strange things. Sometimes what looks like a turn is just a brief straightening before the road bends the other way. By spring, the calls had thinned again. My son would answer my calls, but his wife often took over within a few minutes to say he was just heading out. My daughter started a new job that kept her busy, and I genuinely was happy for her. And I tried to give her the space she needed while still just existing somehow in her life. Then something happened that changed my understanding of things, not all at once, slowly, the way a photograph develops. It started with a phone call from my son in April. About 8 months after Leonard passed, he asked, very gently, very carefully, whether I had thought about the house, whether I was finding it too big to manage on my own, whether I had thought at all about next steps, financially, going forward. I said I hadn't given it a lot of thought yet, that I was still settling. He said he understood completely, of course. No pressure, just whenever I was ready to talk through options, he and his wife would love to sit down with me and help me think through things. I thanked him. I hung up and stood in the kitchen for a long time, holding the phone. Leonard had done well for himself over the years. Not wealthy, not the kind of wealthy people mean when they say wealthy, but comfortable. He had a retirement account that had grown steadily, a small investment portfolio his brother had helped him set up years ago, and the house, which we'd paid off. Modest by some measures, but real. Solid. The kind of security that takes a lifetime to build. My son had always known this in a vague way, the way adult children often know things about their parents' finances without knowing the specifics. But I thought about the timing of that call. 8 months after his father's death. The spring thaw. The question about the house wrapped in concern. I thought about it for a long time. I thought, maybe I'm being uncharitable. Maybe he really is just worried about me. Maybe this is care, dressed up in practical language because he doesn't know how to say it any other way. But then I thought about the armchair by the window. and the driveway, and the 2 visits. And I thought, was there a moment when they started seeing us differently? Not as their parents, but as a balance sheet with a heartbeat? Or had that been coming for a long time, and I'd just been too close to see it clearly? I didn't have an answer. I still don't, entirely. In September, I decided to have a small gathering for my birthday. 71 felt like a milestone. Not the big round number, but still. Leonard had always made my birthday feel like an occasion, and I thought maybe it was time I did that for myself. I invited my son and his wife and their 2 kids. I invited my daughter and her husband and their little one. I invited a few friends from town, my friend Odessa, who I'd known since we were both young mothers pushing strollers around the same park. My neighbor Gordon, who always brought me tomatoes from his garden and never asked for anything in return. A woman from my church named Viveka, who had a laugh that could fill a whole room and always sat beside me when she could. 7 adults, 3 children. Not a large gathering. Lunch, maybe some cake. I cleaned the house. I bought good wine. I made that potato salad Leonard used to love, the one with the whole grain mustard. And I made it even though he wasn't there to eat it, because sometimes you do things in honor of someone even when it hurts a little. The day before, my son called. He said he was so sorry, but they weren't going to be able to make it. His wife's family was having a thing. An annual lake weekend. They'd had it on the calendar for months. It completely slipped his mind that it overlapped with my birthday. He sounded genuinely sorry. He said they'd do something the following weekend. Dinner, just the 2 of us if I wanted. He was convincing. He was warm. I've known him for 47 years, and I still couldn't tell, in that moment, whether he was telling the truth. I said, of course. I understood. My daughter called an hour later. There had been a miscommunication with flights. They'd looked at the wrong weekend. They were mortified. They were so sorry. She'd been meaning to double-check, and time just got away from her. She sounded rushed. Her youngest was crying somewhere in the background. I said, don't worry about it. I said, really, it was fine? After I hung up, I sat at the kitchen table with my hands flat on the surface, and I looked at the wall and I thought, there it is. The thing I'd been trying not to see for a year and a half. Not a single incident, not a misunderstanding, not bad luck. A pattern. The pattern of 2 people who had somewhere better to be, who had the same better place to be on my first birthday without their father. I thought about calling them back. I thought about saying what I actually felt. But what would I have said? I'm not a woman who makes scenes. Leonard always said I was the most composed person he'd ever known. And he meant it as a compliment. And I received it that way. But sometimes composure costs you something. Sometimes you hold so still for so long that nobody realizes you're bleeding. I had the party anyway. Odessa brought a pie. Gordon came with tomatoes even though it wasn't tomato season, which made me laugh and nearly cry at the same time. Viveka told a story about her son-in-law getting stuck in a revolving door that had all of us crying with laughter, and I thought, this is something too. This counts. This is not nothing. But it was not what I had expected, and my children were not there. A month after my birthday, I went looking for something in Leonard's study. He'd had a small roll-top desk that I'd barely touched since he died. It felt like his territory, and I wasn't ready to go through it, not really. But I needed the number for our accountant, and I remembered Leonard kept a small address book in the upper left drawer. I found the address book. And underneath it, in a red envelope I'd never seen before, I found a letter. It was in Leonard's handwriting. Undated. I recognized the pen, a fine-tip black Pilot he'd been partial to for 30 years. The paper was from the notepad we kept by the phone. He'd written it to me. I won't say everything that was in it. Some of it is mine, but he wrote that he'd been thinking, during those weeks in the chair, about the things he'd never said clearly enough. That he loved me in a way that had only gotten bigger over the years. Which surprised him, because he thought he'd understood love when he was young, and it turned out he hadn't understood it at all. That our life together was the finest thing that had ever happened to him. He wrote that he was worried about me. Not about whether I'd manage. He knew I would manage. He'd never doubted that for a second. He was worried about whether I'd let myself be cared for, or whether I'd smile and say, "I'm fine," until I believed it, the way I always did. He wrote, "Don't give them what doesn't belong to them yet. Not the house, not the money, not your dignity. Those things are yours. I worked for them and you worked for them and they're yours." He wrote, "You know the difference between someone who loves you and someone who loves what you have. You've always known. Trust what you know." He wrote, "Find your people. They exist. Some of them are probably closer than you think." I sat at that desk for a long time. I folded the letter back into the red envelope. I put it in my own drawer, in my own bedside table, where I'd put my own things. Then I made a phone call to a woman named Catherine Breck. She was an estate attorney who'd been recommended to me by Odessa, who'd used her the year before when Odessa's mother passed. I had made that call once before, 2 months after Leonard died, and then lost my nerve and canceled the appointment. This time I kept it. "I'm not going to tell you I cut my children off. That's not what happened, and it wouldn't be accurate. They are still my children. I still love them in the cellular, unreasonable way that has nothing to do with whether they deserve it or whether they've earned it in recent years. That doesn't switch off. I don't believe it ever does. But I did make some changes. I redid my will. I've been putting it off for more than a year, telling myself I wasn't ready, when really, I think I was afraid of what it would mean to do it, that doing it would make Leonard's death more final, more real. But I went to see Catherine, and I sat across from her in her very tidy office on a Tuesday afternoon in October, and I told her what I wanted. My wishes were not unkind, but they were honest, and they were mine. I also stopped waiting for my phone to ring. I know how small that sounds, but for the better part of a year I had been living in a kind of suspension, keeping my days slightly open, not making plans too far ahead, leaving Sunday afternoons free just in case someone called and wanted to come by. Waiting. The way Leonard had waited in his chair by the window, and I decided I wasn't going to do it anymore. I called the Vega and asked if she wanted to go to that afternoon lecture series at the library, the one about local history that I'd been seeing flyers for and never quite gotten around to. She said absolutely. She'd been wanting to go for weeks, so we went. And it was genuinely interesting, and we went for coffee after, and I came home at 6 in the evening having had a full day, and I noticed that I had not checked my phone once. I started a small thing, nothing ambitious, just tending a raised bed in the backyard, which Leonard had built for me years ago, and which I'd let go mostly wild after he got sick. I planted garlic in the fall because garlic takes no particular skill and rewards the most minimal attention, and I needed to start somewhere. Gordon came over one afternoon uninvited and spent 2 hours on his knees in the dirt next to me, talking about absolutely nothing important, and it was one of the best afternoons I'd had in a long time. My son called in November. We talked for 40 minutes. He did not mention the house or the money or the will. He told me about a road trip his family was planning for the summer and his youngest's soccer progress and a book he'd been reading. I told him about the garlic and the lecture series and a funny thing that happened at the grocery store. It felt almost like talking. I didn't tell him about the letter or the lawyer. Maybe I will someday. Maybe not. My granddaughter, my daughter's youngest, she's 7. Her name is Petra. Wait, no, I'm remembering wrong. They named her Willa, a small, serious child with her father's dark eyebrows and a habit of asking questions that require you to stop and actually think before answering. Why do birds know where to go? Do houses miss the people who used to live in them? Things like that. She came to stay with me for a week that following summer, while my daughter and her husband took a trip. It was the first time I'd had an extended stretch with her on my own, without her parents nearby. I was a little nervous, if I'm honest. 7-year-olds have energy and requirements that I'd been out of practice with. But she woke up the first morning and padded into the kitchen in her socks and looked around and said, very matter-of-factly, "I like your house. It smells like cookies." It didn't smell like cookies. I hadn't baked in weeks. But something about the way she said it, like she'd decided something and was simply reporting her conclusion, made me laugh until I had tears on my face. We made actual cookies after breakfast. We made them badly, imprecisely, with too much vanilla. And they were oddly shaped and slightly underbaked in the middle, and absolutely delicious. We ate 4 each. We watched it rain from the porch. I showed her how to plant seeds in little starter pots, and she told me, very seriously, that she had a feeling my tomatoes were going to be the best tomatoes anyone had ever grown. She asked me, on the 3rd day, whether I got lonely. I was quiet for a moment. I thought about giving her the easy answer. She was 7. The easy answer would have been fine. But she was looking at me with those serious, dark eyebrows, waiting, the way children do when they actually want to know the real thing and not the version adults make up to protect them. I said, sometimes. Not as much as I used to, but sometimes. She considered this. Then she said, when I'm grown up, I'm going to come visit you a lot. I'm going to bring my dog. I told her I'd hold her to it. She nodded, satisfied, like we'd made a binding agreement. And then she went back to carefully watering her seed pots, one small pour at a time, so seriously, as if the whole enterprise depended entirely on her. I don't know, really, where things stand. That's the honest answer, and I'm trying to be honest. My son and I have reached something that feels, tentatively, like warmth again. Not what it was when he was young, and I was the center of his world, and he would run to the door when I came home. Something more adult than that. More careful, with edges still visible. But real. I believe it's real. My daughter and I are still finding our way. There are phone calls that feel like the old ones, where we talk and lose track of time and hang up, and I smile at nothing for a little while. And there is still the other kind, the checkbox calls. I've stopped bracing for the difference. You take what you get. The letter stays in my bedside drawer. I read it sometimes, not always for the parts about the money or the warning, mostly just for the beginning, where he says the thing about love growing bigger over the years and surprising him. I like that part most. I think that's the truest thing he ever wrote. Leonard was not a man who believed in leaving things unsaid, not really. He believed in saying them clearly and then doing the thing you said. He would be glad I went to see the lawyer. He would be glad about Odessa and Gordon and Viveka and the lecture series and the garlic and the cookies and Willa's very certain tomato predictions. He would probably say, I told you. He would probably smile when he said it. I would roll my eyes. I would mean it affectionately. That was always how it went. The house still makes sounds at night. The wind chimes still knock. The refrigerator hums. I notice it all, but lately some mornings I wake up before the alarm and lie still and listen to the sounds, and instead of feeling the absence at the center of everything, I feel something else, harder to name. Not happiness exactly. Not peace exactly. More like presence. My own. Still here. Still in the house we built together. Still in this life I made and intend to keep making. That, I think, is not nothing. That, I think, is quite a lot. I've been thinking about cause and effect a lot lately. Not in any grand philosophical way. Just the quiet, private way you think about things when you're older and you finally have enough distance to look back at the shape of your own life. What I saw when I looked back was this. For a long time, I made it very easy for people to take me for granted. Not because I was weak. I don't think that was it. I think I confused self-sacrifice with love. I thought if I kept giving, kept forgiving, kept my calendar open, and my door unlocked and my voice gentle, the people I loved would feel it and return it naturally. That's what I believed. I believed it for decades. And some of them did. Leonard did, every single day. Odessa did, Gordon with his off-season tomatoes, Viveka with her laugh. But my children had learned something different from me without my meaning to teach it. They had learned that I would always be there, fully available, endlessly patient, no matter what, that my presence required nothing from them because I would never withdraw it. I had taught them, without a single word, that my love had no conditions, and so it also had no weight. You don't value what costs you nothing. That's not bitterness. I want to be clear about that. I'm not sitting here angry at them. I'm sitting here honest, which is a different thing. Honesty doesn't feel like anger. It feels like finally putting down something heavy you've been carrying for so long, you stop noticing it was in your hands. Leonard's letter didn't tell me anything I hadn't already known somewhere underneath. That's the strange thing about reading words written by someone you loved for 43 years. They don't surprise you, they confirm you. He wrote, "Trust what you know." And what I knew was this: a person who loves you shows up. Not perfectly, not always on time, not without their own struggles and failures, but they show up. The effort is the evidence. I had spent too long accepting the absence as acceptable, too long translating silence into busyness, and missed birthdays into scheduling mistakes, and a father watching a driveway for cars that didn't come into something I should simply understand and not mention. I changed that. Quietly, without announcement, without confrontation, I rewrote my will the way Leonard would have wanted. Not out of punishment, but out of clarity. What you build over a lifetime belongs to the life you actually lived, not to the idea of a family that existed mostly in your own hoping. And I stopped leaving my Sundays open. I filled them with Odessa and Viveka and small, honest pleasures, and I stopped apologizing for that even to myself. Little Willa asked me if I got lonely, and I told her the truth. Sometimes, but less than I used to. That's because of the choices I started making. You cannot wait for other people to decide you're worth their time. At some point, and I think 71 is a reasonable point, though honestly it could have been earlier, you have to decide it yourself. You build the life around the people who actually show up. You tend that garden. You let the rest find its own level. The effort is the evidence. I've staked what's left of my years on that principle, and I have not once regretted it.